Okay, hi, I'm Metta Spencer, and today I'm in Toronto, and two of my friends are also in Toronto, but they have been places where I've never been. So I think we will probably talk about one of their trips, a recent trip, which must have been a real amazing adventure, not altogether pleasant adventure. This is, I have two friends who are joining me. One is Dr. Richard Denton, who is, I guess, in his home in Sudbury, wearing the most outrageous garb I have ever seen. At least the most peculiar I've ever seen on him, because he usually looks like a normal physician, a very respectable guy, but here he is looking like with
just in from bicycling 50K.
50K of bicycling, and this is a guy who actually can do that kind of thing. I don't know. I mean, I'm just overwhelmed with admiration, and it makes it all the better that you are wearing. Why are you wearing this thing? What is this peculiar thing you're wearing?
This is a Rotary International jersey.
Yeah.
And I was doing volunteer work at our nursing home, where we also bicycle the residents around on what we call a rickshaw or a trishaw that has a little bench in front where the resident sits. And then I'm the rickshaw boy on behind, pedaling away. And I take them out for little rides up and down the highway so they get wind in their hair.
Isn't that great? Wonderful. Do they wear bright colored t-shirts too?
Well, it's a fairly large bicycle, and it has a little flag up the back. Mm-hmm. And then I've got my helmet, which has a flashing light on it so that we're very visible. Mm-hmm. And they have, of course, the resident has a helmet on, and they're seat belted in to the bike. But I took one little old lady who needed a crocheted blanket over her knees, and we went very slow at about 7 to 8K per hour. And then I took another gentleman who was a motorcyclist, but he'd like to go a little bit faster, but unfortunately we developed a flat tire. So
now wait a minute, you do these guys one at a time. You don't take a whole
bunch. Yes, one at a time.
Okay. Wow, that is such a wonderful idea. This swell, and you do it as part of the Rotary activity. Correct. You are probably the most dedicated Rotarian in the world. Honestly, I don't know anybody who can keep up with you. That's fabulous. And here we now have a good look at Marty Klein's nose, and I think he's eating breakfast. Hi, Marty Klein. This is Professor Martin Klein, who's a retired history professor at University of Toronto, and his thing is Africa, and he knows all kinds of things, especially about, I guess, West Africa. More, right? Is that fair?
I also know Richard Denton.
That's right.
How are you, Richard?
Yes, we were on the same cruise ship together.
That's what I'm going to talk about in 1 second, but let me also introduce my assistant, Adam Wynn, who is just absolutely the indispensable Mr. Wynn, because he saves the day 5 times a day. Okay, hi, Adam. Thank you. Okay, hello. We got three guys here, and Adam I've probably never been on a cruise ship. Have you? Have you ever been on a cruise ship?
Not in the sense of, I think, what most people would consider a cruise ship. I have been on a ship that went up and down one of the lakes here in Ontario, but I don't think that's really a cruise ship, and it was only for hours. It's a lot younger.
Well, I took only one. No, I've had 3 cruises in my life. I can't say I really like it at all. In fact, I disapprove of cruising, and we can talk about that in a bit. But let's start off in a friendly tone where I won't jump on you. I promise not to criticize you for at least 20 minutes. But I will eventually, because I think both of you are bad. Okay, but now what happened was Martin Klein was going to be the lecturer on a cruise ship, as I understand it, and
That's
give, I guess you got your way paid for giving these lectures every day. Is that right? Or
Well, actually, I had to pay something
You had
because
to
I
pay
got the
something,
free.
but-
I got to travel with people like Richard,
Yeah?
and, a
Okay.
friend of his from British Columbia.
So here you are on this cruise ship going around. You were going to take a long trip, and then COVID hit, and you were stuck on a cruise liner, right?
Well, COVID actually hit before, but Canada hadn't paid much attention. When we arrived, I was lecturing on 2 cruises. One was a 10-day cruise in South Africa, and the other was a 26-day Indian Ocean cruise, and that's where I met Richard. And when we arrived in Cape Town.
Now, wait a minute. This was, say it again, this last one where you were going, where were you supposed to go on this trip where you met?
I was lecturing on 2 cruises, and the first one went without any problems. The first one was just a South Africa cruise. We went from Cape Town to Richards Bay and back, and we stopped at Port Elizabeth and Durban. And the thing about these cruises is that the high point of the cruise is where you visit places, and you spend it on the limiting thing is you spend it just a day there, but still you get to see places that you might not ever get to see. In any case, when we arrived in South Africa, Cape Town, in early February, the South Africans took our temperature and asked us a series of questions before we could be admitted into South Africa. They particularly wanted to know if we'd been to China or if we had contact with people who'd been to China. And when we arrived in Canada 6 weeks later, the Canadians just said, "Oh, you should quarantine for a while," but they didn't. There was no check nothing at the airport. No, Canada had not really paid much attention to COVID.
What were the dates? Let's see. I think people first began aware, it's sort of into this big panic at the very end of February, wasn't it?
Okay, what happened? The second cruise. When did it begin, Richard? It was about the 20th of. It began about the 20th of February.
Correct. Yes, and I think just to follow up on Martin's point was, it's just as Martin said, when we got into Cape Town, the South Africans tested us, and this is sort of the middle of February. And when we came off the ship, which was March 5th, just before March 15th, before the middle of March, and landed back in Canada, they did not test us at all, no questions. We just sailed right through customs as if nothing had happened. And yet, by this time, COVID was well entrenched. The shelves were now devoid of toilet paper and flour and that sort of thing. So again, as Martin says, Canada was way behind on the mark.
But you were told to quarantine. Did they make sure you did quarantine, or do they just trust you?
No, in fact, we went shopping. We had, because we were going to be away for 26 days, we'd emptied our refrigerator. And so the first thing we did was to go to the supermarket.
Yeah.
After we got back. After that, we pretty much stayed home because March 15th was the key date. It was the date we returned, but it was also the date when Canada really turned on to the threat of the pandemic. In the Pacific, on our Pacific cruise, not Pacific, our Indian Ocean cruise, once we left, we started in Cape Town, and we were supposed to go to Madagascar, to Mauritius, to Sri Lanka, and to India, and to Réunion. None of these countries had been affected at the time, but they were all by early March or by late February, all of them were very nervous about the pandemic, and for good reason.
Well, I think even most Canadians were nervous before, still in February, because I have not been out of my apartment since the last week of February. Yeah. And it's still to this day, I only went to the garbage chute once about a year ago. Seriously. And I have not been out of my apartment, and I'm not going out for a while because I just love it. It's such a free feeling. I'm in control of everything, and it's just wonderful. But so that's not the point. I enjoy my solitude and my ability to socialize with people like you, and so I have this wonderful combination of sociability and isolation, and sort of ability to control my own schedule, which is just terrific. Anyway, the point is that I decided in the last week of February that this was the time to start staying home. And that's about the time that everybody started buying all the toilet paper, which I gather, according to where you live, it depends on where you live, what you think is so important. Because although North Americans stocked up on toilet paper, Russians stocked up on buckwheat. That's what they wanted. There's lots and lots of buckwheat. So all the buckwheat grains and cereals and things flew off the shelf all over Russia. There you go. Anyway, so
the other thing is Lysol and disinfectants were very, very difficult to acquire for a while. And I remember walking through the grocery stores, and of course the toilet paper and the disinfectants are all in the same aisle, and it'd be just empty shelf after empty shelf after empty shelf from people panic buying. And then the stores tried to put, measures in that you could only buy one of them at a time and things like that.
Okay, so you guys had not known each other, and you found yourself on the same ship. Where did you meet? At what point? And
on the ship. I was one of the nice things about giving lectures is that you meet a lot of people very quickly. But people meet each other quickly on the boat because some people are there in groups, and I was what did they call me, Dr. Martin?
Yeah, well, he's a real doctor. He's the PhD. I'm just a medical doctor.
So people who attended my lectures, or people who didn't, who attended who noticed the publicity for my lectures, would approach me in the cafeteria or one of the restaurants. So we met a lot of people very quickly.
Yeah.
We also, when Suzanne and I do these cruises, we like to meet people. They give you a choice of whether you want to eat alone or whether you want to eat with other people. And we generally choose to eat with other people because I don't care if people disagree. We did have on one cruise, we had a right-wing couple that bothered my wife, but I enjoyed exchanging ideas with them. And certainly this cruise was a good one.
Yeah. Well, I've taken 2 cruises in the Caribbean, and one which was a much longer thing. It was from Florida across the Atlantic, and then I think 17 days around the Mediterranean, stopping into various ports. And I had the idea that I was a single woman, and I would just find some other single people, another single woman on the cruise or something. And she and I, or some of us would go around town together whenever we'd get off the ship and we'd go exploring. Well, I'd have company. Well, no, what happens is on these cruises is, in my experience, everybody is with a partner. They're only couples. And there probably were not, out of the 3,000 people on that ship, there probably weren't 2 single people in the whole lot. And they were not interested in traveling around with me. So I would go to lunch with or dinner with all of these people who were couples. But then if you get on a bus, they didn't talk to each other. A bus, the couples would sit together and they talk, like couples, but there wasn't any group activity at all. So I found it really not friendly and not a way to meet people. I mean, you could meet couples, but then it wasn't, there was a limit to how much interaction there was. So
well,
I didn't.
A different, not only are there different cruise companies have their own personality, but different cruises. I was told after the first cruise that I would have a more interesting group on the second cruise. But what was interesting is partly that they had more money to buy a 26-day cruise. But it's true, there were a lot of very, I had a guy who had served in the British Empire. I forget whether he'd been a military officer or a civil servant. And in one of my lectures, he was a good participant. There were a number of people who were very lively.
And your lectures were all about Africa, right? History of Africa? Yeah.
That's right. Because, well, no, I was prepared to lecture on Sri Lanka and India and Mauritius. And then Mauritius is considered Africa, but I was going to lecture on Sri Lanka, the Indian Ocean. You lecture on wherever you're going.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what the company wants is somebody to talk about the places they're going to, or the general history of the area you're traveling through. Mm-hmm. Suzanne and I go to different things because, like you, Suzanne is somewhat mobility limited, and on the we rarely go to the same. She will usually book a bus tour where she doesn't have to walk very much.
The best thing is you go on these tours that you hop on and hop off, but you can stay on as long as you want. So when I would go, any city, that's the first thing I would do is I'd get on one of these buses and then I'd go round and round and round and around. Like sometimes for Paris, it'd be 5 times before I get off. And I get kind of really sort of know where I was at the end of the time. Same with Florence, for example. That's a great way to do it if you don't like to walk.
Yeah.
Okay. Now it's interesting. Adam is interested right now in getting a talk show going about Diego Garcia. I bet your cruise ship didn't stop in Diego Garcia, did you?
Mm-mm.
No, that's a big secret, right? But Adam is going to find somebody who can tell us all about that, right, Adam? You're working on it.
Yes, and we've reached out to 3 people so far. Ambassador David Snoxell in the UK, who is the former High Commissioner for Mauritius, and Diego Garcia. So I've reached out to him, and then also David Vine at the American University in Washington, D.C., who has expressed an interest in participating. And he wrote the book, The Islands of Shame, which documents what has happened with Diego Garcia and the forced expulsion of the Chagosians and things like that. So it'd be a very interesting discussion, especially with how geopolitically sensitive that archipelago is.
And apparently they moved all the people off so that they could have it for a completely military base. Is that correct, Adam?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. And you were telling me a couple of days ago that the Indian government has obtained or maybe always had an island where they're going to do the same kind of thing.
Got rid of all the people. They moved them. And the people want to go back. And Mauritius claims Diego Garcia is part of Mauritius. I think the British are still sovereign, and independence becomes irrelevant when there are no people there.
Yeah. Richard, okay, so tell me about your adventure. You and Biz joined the cruise where?
In Cape Town. We all got on in Cape Town, and then we were going across the Indian Ocean, and as Martin says, up through Sri Lanka, Cochin, Mumbai, and then ending up in Dubai. But what happened was the ports kept closing on us. We were able to go to Colombo in Sri Lanka and take on provisions, but none of the passengers were able to get off. But it was interesting. There was a Russian warship just ahead of us, docked at the pier, and all the Russians got off to be tourists for the day. So we saw them.
They were allowed, the Sri Lankans allowed the Russians, but not Western people off the ship?
Correct.
I didn't see the Russians, but you have to, they were very nervous. I don't know what their arrangements with Russia were, but these countries were all nervous. Ironically, we had been living in a bubble, you know, that we didn't have any COVID. We did have a slight outbreak of a kind of dysentery, a minor stomach upset, which they cracked down on very quickly. My wife was confined to quarters they brought food.
Nobody caught COVID at all. Well,
No,
if there was
couldn't catch COVID because there was nobody to catch it from.
Right.
We were, and the fact that we got into Mauritius, but Mauritius had done a habit. We got into Reunion. Reunion hadn't had any COVID cases, and we couldn't get into to Madagascar, to Sri Lanka, to India, and then when we approached our final destination, the United Arab Emirates closed Dubai, so that there was no chance of us catching COVID and therefore communicating it.
So your entire social life, this cruise was just seeing each other on the ship the whole time. You never got off.
Yeah.
Correct.
Except for Mauritius and Reunion.
Yeah. Okay. So what did you get to see in Mauritius and Reunion, those places?
Oh, Mauritius is quite. I got to have dinner with a colleague, not dinner, lunch with a colleague in Mauritius, and we got to see the botanical gardens. We got to see some of the plantation homes, or at least one of the plantation homes.
Mm-hmm.
Mauritius was a plantation colony.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Richard, what about you and Biz? What did you do in Mauritius or Reunion? How do you say it? Reunion?
Reunion, yeah.
Yeah.
Basically the same as Martin. We did the botanical gardens. I think to get to your original question, I think on cruise ships, is as Martin says, you only get to spend one day in a location, and it therefore is quite limited. So it's not like doing volunteer work in Nicaragua or the Dominican or Jamaica, which I've done. And that way you really get to know the people. But we've been on these tours, and prior to doing Mauritius, we went on one in South Africa, and we went into the rural townships and for the day, and we got to have lunch with some local people in the township, and therefore we were able to talk one-on-one with a local person, and so that was very instructive. One, to see their home, have a tour of their home, It was interesting because we went to her home in a car with the chauffeur. And there was a second car behind us as, quote, the backup in case we got into any problems.
Problems being what? Flat tires or armed guerrillas? What are you talking about?
Either way. I've gone across the Sinai where there was an armed Jeep with a machine gun on front and another machine gun vehicle behind us as we traveled through the Sinai.
Okay, the Sinai I could understand, but South Africa as a source of that kind of violent threat.
Well, you're going into the townships, which is a poorer area.
Yeah.
So certainly I've been in a lot worse. Calcutta comes to mind. But even we've been through Soweto and really did not have any problems. And I've been up in other townships in South Africa. But I mean, it's good to have your wits about you and to, quote, take precautions, and precautions were taken.
Okay. And so there's reason to worry enough to try to look out after your own personal security in a place like that. See, that is interesting to me, because I actually didn't know that things are that dicey there.
Well, the company is anxious. I don't think I was on any trips where there was any extra security. The company is certainly, however, very careful not to put you at risk.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, because they make their money on tourists, and the last thing they want is something where people would get hurt or there would be. Mm-hmm. And the governments generally want us. I mean, I've lectured on another cruise ship with Lindblad, and Lindblad's an unusual cruise company that does small boat and what they call adventure cruising. And we went for, and this one I got paid for, and I was and it was a 37-day cruise from Cape Town to Morocco.
So how many of these trips have you been on? You do this as a habit, sounds like.
Well, I've only lectured on 2 cruises.
Okay.
I originally got involved. It's not my kind of tourism, and like Richard, I've often gone to places to do research, and I like if I had my choice, what I'd like is to live someplace for a while.
Yeah.
And if I'm doing research, you live in the city, you live in the community. And my research in Africa, I've spent a lot of time in villages. I love village.
Yeah.
You know, but you get to know people. Mm-hmm. You live there. On the other hand, my wife is not very mobile.
Yeah. And
she likes to travel. I mean, you can understand, because I think you're similar, and you're both older women. Yeah. With mobility constraints, and
well, the cruise is a perfect thing for somebody like that.
And the cruise is perfect.
Yeah, even if you're in a wheelchair, I think you could probably cope with it, because
there are people in wheelchairs. There are people who don't get off the boat.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah.
Well, you guys didn't get off the boat. Sounds like you hardly got
off the boat. If nothing else, if nothing else, she will get off the boat if we're in a town or a city, and walk a little bit, as much as she can walk, and then she'll sit at a cafe. Mm-hmm. Whereas I'll take a cruise. I'll take a trip when the year I spent in Berlin, we did a cruise of the Baltic, which is an area you know well. And I tore my meniscus. So I had arranged a walking tour of St. Petersburg, a bike trip in Helsinki.
Mhm.
And I had to cancel all of that because my knee got shot. But
I did one down the Dnieper River, come to think of it. So that makes the number about 5 cruises I've had. I haven't ever kept track of it before. But
well, we did one. I was invited to a conference a number of years ago in Russia. And this was one of the first cruises. It may have been the first one we did. And we were trying to figure out how we could see more of Russia.
Mhm.
And we found that there were cruises.
Mhm.
You could get in a riverboat in St. Petersburg and go to Moscow.
Mhm.
And riverboats are fantastic because you look out the window.
Yeah.
You sit on the deck and you see the way people are farming, or you see whether the whole northern part of Russia is forest. The
Mhm.
first part of the trip, you're going through this
Mhm.
forest inhabited by Finnish people,
Yeah.
and the other thing is you can have some short experiences which are very exciting.
Mhm.
On the Russian trip, they set up a breakfast in a city north of Moscow. One of the, Moscow is surrounded by these old cities. And we were lucky because mostly they were middle class, with a local doctor. It was a chance to pick up a little money
Mhm.
by hosting people. We were in a family group that had a daughter that worked for the company. And it was a perk for the company, but we got to see how Russian people actually live.
Mhm.
And in fact, one of the things that I ended up becoming very aware of in Russia and in Eastern Europe is that for most people live in very crowded conditions. That family life is very different when family members are sleeping on rollout beds under the sofa, or in the summer on the balcony of the apartment.
I'm really
and
interested in
people
hearing
talk.
more about what life was like for people on a 30-day trip who don't even hardly get off the ship at all. You have about 2 days off the ship. The rest of the time, you're confined to socializing with each other. Now, you were a star because you were one of the performers. You got to do these shows, so everybody would come to you. But Richard, you were a consumer of entertainment, right? So
Correct.
what was social life like? Whom did you meet? How did you spend your time? Was there anything? I mean, when you couldn't go ashore, what did you make up for that with? What other entertainment or projects could you undertake except just spend more time at the dinner table talking to more people?
Well, certainly, I think, Metta, that is definitely for me, a foodie, it is a highlight. But, and as Martin says, cruise ships differ. So you have cruises like Cunard, where they do have a lot of professors like Martin giving very good talks on the ship, which you can learn about or learn from. So that is good. And then, of course, there's just relaxing and reading books yourself, which is what you can do.
I think you brought your computer or something, and you wrote a long, like almost a novel or something. What did you write?
Well, again, you write about what you're traveling and what you're learning about different venues. So I learned from Martin, obviously, and would write up his lectures. And I find it's beneficial to myself because it helps me to remember what Martin said. But two, I then, because it's on a computer, I can hit the send button and send it to my friends who want to know, what life is like in Russia and how people are sleeping on the rooftops or in the rollout beds. So this is where I think cruise ships are very advantageous, Metta, is by going to different countries and learning firsthand how people live. I think certainly, I watch travelogues and often to places where I've been and says, yes, I've been there. But at the same time, you don't get the ambiance. You're not eating the food. You're not smelling the aromas, the odors of a city. You're not hearing the bustle, the sounds of it. You're not driving through confused traffic and horrible traffic. When we were in India, an Indian who says, now in Canada, you have lines down the road. Do they actually mean something? Because in India, you'll have 5 cars abreast and they're all just going down the road and certainly not paying any attention to white lines on the road. So it's little things like that that you learn about. And you learn it firsthand by observing it. I mean, as a family doctor, you do house calls and you learn so much about your patients on doing a house call.
Sorry, have you ever done that? As when you're on a tour, you're asked to
not on a tour, but as a doctor doing house calls, and
sure.
as Martin says, when you're visiting people and you visit people in their home, you learn so much more about the way of life.
Yeah, absolutely. I quite agree. And it is a little hard to organize a stay, abroad if you have to rent a house and then arrange for somebody to translate for you and everything. Yeah. But I was just thinking what fun it would be for you to go around with another doctor who's doing house calls. Have you ever tried to do that? Because it'd be really, really interesting as a physician to just, tag along and see what the other guys are doing.
Well, again, so I've got my Rotary shirt on here, and Rotary does these fellowship exchanges. And so I led a group study exchange to Tamil Nadu in India. And so I would, as a medical doctor, would be put up with a doctor. We had a mason, and we tried to find other masons for him to be put up with. We had a person from with the YMCA, and so we tried to find similar people for him. And teachers are fairly easy, but some of these others were a little more difficult. But we certainly tried to find people of the similar vocations to interact and learn about each other. So I did a fellowship or friendship tour of South Africa, and again got into Soweto and other places that you just wouldn't get into normally.
Okay, now both of you have given what looks like an absolutely stunning promotional pep talk about why everybody should go on a cruise. Because if I just listened to what you'd said, I would sign up tomorrow. But on the other hand, I've added my own experience and my own theories about what should be done. My experience when I've taken these tours, well, the ones that I've taken are mostly well before there was any climate change issue. Nobody was worried whatsoever about climate change and the greenhouse gas emissions from cruise ships. So I don't, except for the last one, which I've just described, which was the longest one. It was one over a month long, and it was from Florida to around across the Atlantic and around the Mediterranean. And that was one where I already had decided that I knew there was such a thing as climate change and that we should not emit greenhouse gases by traveling. And so I wasn't, for a year, or maybe 2 or 3 years, I did not go anywhere. I would take a train trip because I figured a train didn't emit too much stuff, but I wouldn't fly. But I had to go to Russia. And so I thought, how am I going to get to Russia and not create too much greenhouse gas? Because I had read that if you take a flight, let's across Canada, for example, if you go from Vancouver to Montreal, with that one flight, you've already used up your entire greenhouse gas quota for the year. The rest of the year, you can't go outside your house if you really are trying to limit your greenhouse gas emissions. But all of my friends continue to fly. And just in the last 2 days, I've talked to at least 3 or 4 people who are going to Europe or who've gone to New York to weddings or doing this or that. And they have no shame whatsoever about emitting all this greenhouse gas. And I've got to the point where I'm almost ready to say, I'm going to start scolding people because you can't do that anymore. You've got to stop it. No more travel, not like that. So at the time, I thought, I know how I can get to Russia. I can take a cruise because a cruise surely doesn't emit less greenhouse gas, does it? Naively. And I'll take this cruise across the Atlantic and it won't be a flight. And then I'll take a train from Barcelona to Paris and then from Paris to Kiev and from Kiev to Moscow, which is a train is a good thing. Okay. The train part I still would endorse because I think you don't emit too much per person. But I found out later that the cruise ships are the worst of all, that they use this stuff called bunker oil and they emit the worst kind of greenhouse gas you can imagine. And the carbon footprint of taking a cruise is just horrendous. So I will never do that again. And I simply don't think that it is, I don't know what to do because these companies that own these ships, how can they possibly be environmentally friendly? How can they possibly be sustainable? I don't think there is a way to be sustainable. I mean, they might be able to just park their ship in the harbor someplace and use it as a hotel so that people who want a vacation or something could go spend a night or two in their cabins and things like they would as a hotel. Otherwise, I don't see how it's sustainable. And even though I absolutely understand the value of going around and meeting people, I don't think you guys can do it anymore. So please, now you have a chance to defend yourself.
Okay, well, maybe I'll start off. The country that is the greatest polluter in the world is China. But the country with the greatest polluter per capita in the world is the United States. So you can look at sort of total pollution, you can look at pollution per capita. And of course, on a ship, you've got thousands of people. And so you can look at it as per capita it's maybe not that bad. Number two, I think the cruise lines have certainly improved their track record. It used to be that they definitely used the ocean as a garbage dump. But now they are much more environmentally friendly, and like many industries, that they're doing that. And then we talked about COVID. To get on a cruise ship now, you have to be doubly vaccinated. And so they're mandating that. So plus they'll be testing very securely because, as Martin has said earlier, is they want tourists and they need to look after you, and security and safety is their prime concern, because that will definitely sink their ship, so to speak, if tourists are being harmed in any way or not having a good time, such as being locked in the room due to a pandemic. So they are very conscious about all of that. Now, I think that there are sort of the two aspects, as you say, Metta. I think that a friend of mine, a fellow Rotarian, has just brought an electric vehicle. He's getting solar panels put on his roof, and he's become a vegetarian. So he's an inspiration to me. He's a role model, obviously, to me. And I think that the more people that do this, then obviously the better, because people are numerous. And even though their carbon footprint is very small, it all adds up. But again, I would maintain that we also need to look at the large areas of pollution. The military, as an example, was excluded from Kyoto, was excluded from Paris. And the US military emits more greenhouse gases than all of Sweden. Mm-hmm. So you can look at it sort of from 2 points of view. One is the individual, and the more that individuals do to become vegans and vegetarians.
I don't believe in veganism, by the way. I think people should eat meat, and that's a whole different thing. But nevertheless,
okay.
Finish your pitch. I can't help intervening with that, because I think that we absolutely need animals, and the idea of abolishing animals, large herbivores, is a terrible idea. Anyway, but Adam is itching to speak. Adam, speak.
Oh, I was just going to say, have you folks seen the article saying that some types of cruise ships have the daily equivalent emissions of 1 million cars? They can use the same amount of fuel and have the same emissions as 1 million cars per day. And I'm wondering if we do need stricter legislation for ensuring that cruise ships have stronger environmental policies, because they're kind of in a gray zone right now, especially when they're on international waters. But 1 million cars a day equivalent emissions, that's insanity.
Okay, you're right, Adam, if it's true. Now, if you can quickly find the source of that, we ought to, since that's an inflammatory accusation, which I've been flame throwing already, but you just poured gasoline on my fire. But you better find the source of that, because if 1 million cars per cruise ship, that is bad. And I don't think anybody can deny that it's bad. Either one of you guys.
Luxury cruise giants emit 10 times more air pollution, specifically SOx, than all of Europe's cars.
Say it again. Where's that from?
I'm sending you the link in the chat, and that's sulfuric oxide.
No, chats don't do any good. You got to say it and so on.
So transport and environment, luxury cruise giant emits 10 times more air pollution than all of Europe's cars. And then there's also a CBC article about the million cars emission, or the equivalent emissions of 1 million cars per day.
Right. Okay. So there you go, guys. Now I'll see what you can say to defend yourself. Marty, you haven't had a chance to.
Yeah, you're making me feel guilty.
I hope so. I'm trying to.
It's I'd have to examine this. I mean, I've already made there's another problem with cruise ships, and that is the impact on what, I don't know what you call it, major destinations, so that cruise ships are a threat to Venice. And I've twice been, and I would hate to deny myself the possibility of visiting Venice again. But because Venice is, it's a.
Oh, Venice would be a special case, though. There's not many.
Well, also Barcelona. one of the problems with intense use and tourism is that it can overwhelm a city. Barcelona, for example, that there's a resistance, not just to cruise ships, but to tourists, because they force up the price of hotels, they force up the price of real estate, because and local people bear the consequence. On the one hand, they bring money into the economy, though Barcelona is already a prosperous city, whereas Venice is sort of a historic Disneyland.
Okay.
Well, it's I don't know what the best term is. It's incredibly beautiful. Only about 60,000 people actually live in Venice, and it lives off tourism. It's swamp, but you know, and it's sinking into the sea, and they're trying massive expenditures to save Venice, because the city itself. I mean, there are individual things in the city that are great works.
Yeah, I would love to live in Venice, I think, at least for a while. It's wonderful. Now, okay. Now, if you guys will concede that I have a point, at least a small point, and that Adam...
No, definitely you have a point.
What?
Definitely you have a point. I'll certainly concede
Definitely
that.
have a point. And I'm not going to take any more cruises, but the question I'm wondering is what can be a even halfway satisfactory alternative that will meet some of the things that you have already mentioned as the pluses of these cruises, and meeting people and being able to see people in their own environments, go into people's homes and see how people really live and smell the city and so on. Well, you know, I really love my Zoom. I don't need to go travel anymore. I can just sit right here and talk to you guys as if we were at the dinner table on a cruise ship. And now, but you know, then the challenge is how to meet more people that I might not ordinarily have come in contact with. I like the idea of being thrown into the challenge of having to meet and talk to somebody that I probably don't really like very much. I remember the only time I ever was so indignant, I sat at the dinner table with somebody on that cruise who was anti-Obama. And he was so nasty that I picked up my plate and silverware and I moved to another table because I just couldn't stand him. But apart from that, I think I benefited from having to actually encounter people whose point of view necessarily didn't meet mine. And that doesn't happen necessarily on Zoom. I love the fact that I can control my contacts. I don't have to go out if I don't want to, and I can avoid things that I don't want to do. But really, I should be forced to do more contact with people that I disagree with, or maybe even dislike a little bit. So I think that we got a good substitute for cruise ships, absolutely free, costs absolutely nothing to sit at your computer and talk to people in the other countries. Yesterday, or day before, I had my birthday party on Zoom, and I think I'm adding them up, counting them. I think I've received greetings from way over 100 people, but a lot of them, I think something like 70 or 80 of them were actually on that birthday party, and they came. But you know, you're sitting there, and a lot of these people have these green screens behind them, which means fake. I like it when people show their actual background, and even if it's in a messy room, you know, and if they're really untidy, I don't care if it looks real. But you know, you can't hug people, and you can't smell them, and you can't taste their food. And so we've got to figure a big improvement on how to do Zoom conference calls that will make it possible for everybody in the world to do the equivalent of a cruise for free and not do any greenhouse gas emitting. All right.
And I think your point, Metta, of meeting other people who have different ideas is also very important, because I think with computers, the actual browsers have their algorithms that give you information that you like. So they keep you in your own silo. And so I think that's something that you want to avoid, as you say. So I certainly applaud you on that.
Okay, well, let's work on this. What do you think of the idea of having cruise ships parked in a harbor and then just become, they could be weekend adventure things where people come and just use it as a hotel, and they might have put on entertainments of various kinds, like hire Martin to come and give talks. So it would be just as good as if you were, floating around the ocean or actually visiting these towns, right? Do you think anybody would want to go on a cruise that doesn't go anywhere?
Well, I mean, you
No.
have that with vacation resorts. Resorts are like that.
Yeah. Okay.
But
I've got to think about.
they're not sitting in a harbor.
That's true.
I think people, I think the people who cruise are still a minority of quote unquote people. They're even a minority of people who have money, because people have money do different things.
Mm-hmm.
I'd be curious about the small boats versus the big boats. I'd be curious about measures which some of the companies claim they've taken, but I won't necessarily, these are big companies that are trying to make money. That most of the big cruise ships in the world are owned by 3 companies who control a lot of other companies.
Yeah.
And this is a big business.
Yeah.
And I have maybe it's the social democrat in me, but I have a certain skepticism about big business.
Yeah.
But they provide me an opportunity to do something. I'm not, the things I've most enjoyed in life, the years I've spent in Africa, the year I spent in Berlin, the 4 months I spent in Australia. But then in Australia, I wanted to see Australia. And so we flew up to the Great Barrier Reef. We
emitted a lot of greenhouse gas. I don't know whether it was in the days before we had to worry about such things, but anyway.
No, the greenhouse gases have been around for a while.
No,
I mean, it's become more pressing.
We didn't worry about them for 30 years after we knew about them, and then only gradually became, and we're still not nearly enough aware of it. I mean, I myself, I'm oblivious to how much, what my carbon footprint is, and almost oblivious. But anyway, all right, I've gone as far as I can with this. I think we've both kicked it around a little bit. So let's all think about what we can do to make it possible for these big companies to still make a buck, but without taking people on these tours that I think everybody should avoid from now on. So you are all hereby appreciated for your contributions on this, and scolded for emitting anything. So enough for that. I'm going to say goodbye. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Thank you both. Okay. Bye-bye.
Thank you. And Richard's off.